Hi everyone, how are you today? I'm going to be joined today, we're going to be talking about The Sims, and I'm going to be joined today by Lucy Bradshaw, Executive Vice President of Maxis, where she oversees all game production, and also Rachel Franklin, the Executive Producer on Sims 4. How are you guys today?
Hey, Tal.
Good.
Good.
Let's just start out with kind of a long, intricate question, but The Sims is a very voyeuristic game. You literally tear the roof off and you look inside at somebody's everyday life, what's going on. You know, these days with YouTube and reality television shows, with Facebook, with Twitter, it's a voyeuristic world out there. Mm-hmm. Was that something when The Sims was being first developed, was that something that's always been a flow through, or is it just a coincidence that you happen to hit upon that social change as it was happening here in the States?
Well, I think we're always looking at what people are doing in their lives. That's how we get our inspiration for The Sims. I think you hit on it. Entertainment changes. The way people are relating to one another and each other is always changing. So when we think about how we're going to take the game forward, what are we going to do next, we absolutely find our inspiration in how people are consuming their entertainment. Mm-hmm. So that much more up close kind of intrigue by things like fishermen in Alaska. We think about, why is that intriguing? Well, it's a life that I don't lead, and so how do we imbue our Sims with that same sense of interesting personality and relatability that way? It's absolutely.
It has been part of The Sims from the very beginning, was this idea that we weren't actually making real life, we are sort of creating drama. And what you want out of life is little beings that behave with a personality and a sense of their own free will, because that's what's behind the magic of The Sims, but also do things that are eerily believable in terms of who they are. Right. And that's where, when Sims 4 came about, what our inspiration was, let's bring more identity, more individuality, and more personality to allow the game to be more expressive, for the player to interact and engage in sort of a deeper relationship with their Sims. So our investment a lot had to do with making much more content available to the diversity of Sims that you can make. So building Sims with different traits and having it really play differently and having them feel richer, so that the stories of life, which are really honestly made out of kind of the chaos of life and the drama,
right, setting up that possibility space. Yep.
So how do you go about thinking about these relationships then between the Sims as to try to reflect what happens in real life? Do you work with psychologists? Do you work with social scientists at all? I mean, how do you get to that?
For us, we have an incredibly diverse team. I think that's something to do with it, right? We have people from kind of all walks of life and all different viewpoints. That helps a lot. I think as far as consulting with psychologists, not really. Because at the end of the day, we are creating that drama. It's a simulator of real life, but it's not a replica of exactly real life.
It's focused on bringing fun to the experience. And as you know, and I think most people know about The Sims, it was built off psychological understanding, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What fulfills that? This intensity around objects really make a difference in our lives because they can add comfort, or they can add the kind of time that allows you free time to engage in social activities. That said, it's a great way to sort of think of a reductionist view of life, and that's the basis of our simulation. Building upon that to add drama, to add personality, to build that sort of intensity of these little beings, that's been sort of the evolution of the franchise.
And I think too, we go to all those different life moments. We do push into, we go to death, right? We go to sadness and all of the extreme anger and things like that, but we do it in a very Sims kind of way. So I think that we do explore those different kind of psychological avenues, but not to the point where it becomes depressing. We have a very optimistic view of those things.
Right. You talked a lot about drama and about tension. Those are things I try to avoid in my real life. So I'm just wondering, do you think it's actually a release for people to see that playing out on a screen in front of them?
I think, having watched Sims in every evolution, every generation, one of the things that stays consistent is the way that our players bring their own imagination. And that is part of what we've done, is really allow players to sort of imbue a sense of import. It's why we went with Simlish as opposed to translating into English, because we wanted players to bring their ideas of what's taking place. So, to your point, relatability has always been part of The Sims. I'm super proud of where the team got the Create-A-Sim in this version of The Sims because for the first time you can just mold and shape people to who you think they should really look like, and in such more successful and augmenting player creativity kind of fashion. That already, when you step into the game to play out their lives, you're relating to them in ways that I think are because you've already imbued them with a certain personality. Getting it so that you can choose traits that resemble, Tal's traits or Rachel's traits, all of a sudden takes that a step further. So it's in watching our players bring forward their own stories. And some of them have been immensely poignant. They've shared them through machinima, coming out stories, death of a family member, departure for military life, whatever it might be. These have been stories that our players have been telling. And they often make Sims who resemble their family members and put them into very crazy situations.
And I think sometimes they go down the tension route. Let me try something I haven't done before. Let me have a same-sex relationship with my Sims, play that out, and what would that be like, and is it? But then there's also those touching moments. So I think the drama doesn't have to be just tension. It can be that your Sims have a baby, and isn't that exciting? Or that the first kiss moment, So we have all of the ups and downs. It's not just a tense kind of drama.
So let's touch a little something on what you brought up just a minute ago, Rachel, about death. Mm-hmm. When The Sims, in The Sims, when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one or a neighborhood, say, dispute, it's often done in a comical, humorous way. Like, what's the decision behind that? Like, why address it that way in The Sims?
There's a balance there. It's a really fine line that we walk because the Sims do get upset when someone else dies. There is, the Sims grieve. But at the same time, the Grim Reaper will come and have a tablet and, note taken. You can plead with the Grim Reaper for someone's life, and it's this fun. The balance is really that we want to be able to explore all of these different facets of life, but it's still a game. It still should be a fun exploration. There still needs to be we don't want everybody playing the game and being depressed at the end of it, right? You should feel like you've had a satisfying journey, but it should still be fun.
Let me ask, The Sims has been going on for, about 14 years now, I think.
Yeah.
How do you work with a franchise? Like, how do you make a franchise that has such longevity, and how do you make it new and refreshing for all this time?
I think to begin with, we're starting with life, and that's the subject matter, and that gives us quite a bit of room to think about how do we continue to make it relevant to players today, and also that relatability piece. Being able to more easily create the Sims that you want, giving them more identity and personality opens up that space for players to bring their own stories. I think in the relevance, it's about players are experiencing and making of their own lives, through Instagram and YouTube, some of the things that they can play out in The Sims as well. And it's really kind of funny watching real life take on some aspects of what we put into The Sims over time and vice versa. So we look to those areas and really use it as design inspiration for not only the possibility space that we create in our very open world kind of simulation,
right,
but also in how players can share and sort of augment the game. And that's another factor. I mean, some of what the team has done and that Rachel can speak to is some of our really thinking about how our user creators change the game over time.
Yeah, we have an incredible modding community that just goes wild with creating and our ability to facilitate that. I think there's this wonderful kind of player-to-player relationship. We talk a lot about the player-to-sim relationship, but then there's how do the players relate to one another? How do they share that creativity? And so we've enabled that in The Sims 4. We've made a point of you being able to share those creations readily with each other, and I feel like we can continue to expand on that, continue to really feed that community and that creativity, and that's just one aspect of how we can keep it fresh.
Have you ever seen anything out of the modding community where you looked at it and said, man, I wish we would have thought of that?
Oh, all the time.
Yes.
So not only where they take the creativity of the houses that they've made and using the tools that we've made for them in ways that are astounding. There's things that are in the gallery, which is the new feature in The Sims 4 that just enables sharing, that are just so stupendous. I cannot believe that they were able to create such things. And they will then go in and actually take it outside the game and bring in fresh content that ultimately they can now surface in the gallery as well and share that. And I think, as Rachel was saying, that this is really a matter of engaging player-to-player relationships, making it so much easier for everybody to see those people who are creators and discovery. That's another whole thing about the internet is some people will be creators, some people will discover some of this and make sure that it surfaces, and other people will download and use that content. And I think that just sets up an entire dynamic and a sort of ecosystem that is beneficial to everybody who plays.
Sure.
It's exciting for us to see. I mean, we troll all of this stuff and go, okay, how do we, oh my God, did you see that? And we share that stuff all the time because we're constantly being surprised by it.
There's so many, just even during the development, there's this little guy, and he's out in the gallery right now, and he's called Not an Alien, and if you ever download him, he is just the coolest nerd I've ever seen in the game. So I download a lot of different sims from a lot of different modders. It's quite a bit
cool.
fun.
More than one person obviously makes games. It takes a whole team. It takes a huge team. But obviously when Will Wright was at Maxis, he was a big driving force behind a lot of the vision of what goes on there. Has the design philosophy at Maxis changed at all since his departure?
Well, Maxis really, its identity and a lot of the people that we attract, it has a, sort of a genesis in that sort of curiosity that Will had. And he's a tinkerer. I mean, he takes things apart and then he puts them back together again in ways that fascinate you and give you agency over them. And I think that as we've built Maxis over the years, this is one thing that we have continually come back to, and it's really our sensibility. This idea of a sandbox world simulation. I'm very pleased to say, Will has moved on to do things that were expanding his world and creative impact. And at the same time, so many people contributed, and he was so open to new nuances and people contributing to the ideas, that those ideas have just flourished. And how we think about creativity, how we think about simulation, how we think about that possibility space and player agency is sort of that core identity that is Maxis. And it's a place that feels very fruitful in terms of where we can continue to expand in gaming as it looks today.
I want to go back a little bit to designing and coming in with UGC, and obviously there are many factors out there that you have no idea what could be going on in the game next with a game like this. So how do you go about creating a game where you don't really know what the ultimate outcome is? It's not a linear game whatsoever. So what are some of the big surprises that you've had, I guess, over development, and how do you even go into development?
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make a game like this because of that. I mean, we sort of talk about how we make almost 4 games in one. We have these amazing creativity tools, and we have our live mode where some people play to achieve and other people play just to sort of tinker around and experiment, and some people just build homes for their Sims all day and decorate and do those kinds of things. So it's tough. I mean, I think we try to make sure, kind of to Lucy's point, that the player always wins. Right, that even as we're creating something like revamping our build mode, where you build Sims homes, that in previous incarnations there were times where you kind of get punished for making a decision and changing your mind, and so that's just one area where we said, okay, you know what, it has to feel fun, it has to feel good to the player when they're building a home. Let's make it so that you can actually pick up rooms and change your mind, and you don't get punished for these things. So I think taking that approach where the player creativity wins, that we try to use that as a guidepost for us, but it's hard.
The other thing that we're really open to is during the development of a simulation, one of the things that you look for is emergence. And you can describe emergence any way you want. For me, it's when you have a system that produces results that are not always predictable. And during development, you look for these things and you allow them to be, in the game, and you find them sometimes not because you said, I want to engineer exactly this, but because of the systems that you put together and the way that they interact. And some funny things that did happen during development is we didn't take certain behavior off of Grim. And one player, one of our coders, is sitting there playing the game, checking out some of the code that he made. Grim has now reaped an entire family who happened to have a bassinet, baby in a bassinet. He reaped the entire family before getting around to the baby. The baby was crying. Grim picked up the baby and fed it its bottle. And that's like a beautiful moment where, and a game system just arrives at something that you just kind of, it makes you laugh, it suggests a storyline, it takes you on a little journey, and the game is, and the systems are just ripe with these types of things. That's just one example of the kind of things that you look for as you're sort of testing your simulation and making sure that the systems aren't always predictable. And I think it's in embracing that as much as creativity and sandboxing that makes Sims sort of a very unique space to play in.
Yeah.
Right. With a game like The Sims that started out so open and creative, how do you expand on that? Like, how do you make as many sequels as there have been, and how do you figure out what content to add?
I think for us, particularly with The Sims 4, and kind of back to that that unique personality, how do we make for more possibility space? And it was really about injecting more into the Sims and their personality, making them, giving them these traits that are wonderfully meaningful throughout the lifetime of the Sim, giving them really strong aspirations, and starting with this personality that's very strong. Then you combine it, for example, with their environment, that if they're in this house that has paintings that make you depressed when you look at them, and then combine that with their need states that we're all familiar with, Sims get hungry, and then combine that with other personalities. I think for us, it's a matter of continuing to expand the possibility space and this wonderful sort of combinatorics thing that happens, so that we get this emergence and we get all of these surprising things happening.
Kind of really returning to the core and thinking about where you might allow the simulation to sort of have a sensibility about itself, and that's where Sims 4 really kind of took its first steps.
So reception for the reviews for The Sims 4 have been kind of mixed so far. Just curious about, what are your thoughts on the reception for the game so far?
Well, I think it has been mixed. I think fundamentally we're proud of the game we've made. I think we've made a foundation that has all of this possibility space in it. I think we haven't, frankly, done a great job of explaining to the world how broad the possibility space is.
It's been interesting because, to Rachel's point, one of the things that we found is players are so conditioned to playing Sims in a very certain way. Often they'll make Sims of traits that are kind of allow them to behave more positively toward maintaining them. What we've made is a game which gives you value for creating a diversity of Sims traits. So one of the things that we found really successful, even just in the last little bit, is getting that out there just in terms of save games and some tutorials and some, the Twitch gameplay sessions that we've been doing. All of a sudden we're getting a response, oh my God, this just opened up the game for me. So I think, one of the things, given that what we're hearing is this, some people who wanted us to make a very clear linear sort of progression from Sims 3 versus where we went, which was coming back to the Sims themselves and carrying them forward, and finding where that value is for each kind of player. And one thing I want to assure is that we value the feedback that we get from our players. And the fact that some of them are not finding it is something that they wanted to go to because of the composition of it, but not having the opportunity to see what it is that it has. We're one, education, and two, supporting the game and making sure that we're going to carry it on, that ultimately gets players to feel like there's something for me in this game.
Yep.
This evolution is just the first step in this next generation of The Sims. Come in when you want to, because honestly, there will be a dimensionality that is a really fun experience to play forward.
Great. Let me just end it here, too. I just want to know, what are your thoughts on where's the genre heading? What's next?
Gosh, well, life keeps happening, so
Thankfully.
that's useful for us. We have tons of fodder. I think exploring that notion of player-created content, the UGC, and how do we really invest in that? How do we allow our players to share more readily and kind of blossom that? I think there's a lot that we can do there.
That, and there's this one juicy tidbit of relationship that players have had with their Sims over the course of generations of Sims, which is this ability to slip into calling your Sim I,
Yeah.
or it, they, she. And I think, when we look at the way that players are playing games, it's part of their lifestyle now, that there are devices that you can take with you. There's a lot of territory that we'll be able to explore not only in modding and that creativity landscape, which satisfies a certain motivation of players, but where we take the Sims themselves and the relationship that you have with them. So lots of fun place for us to examine and explore evolving the Sims.
Great. Well, Lucy and Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tal.